Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is March 31st, year 2022. It's the last day of the month. My gosh, this year has gone by so quickly. It's 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. While we're waiting for Mr. Leo Zagami, I would like to make a couple of announcements. He's not here yet in the waiting room, but let me announce that 1 hour from now or 2 hours from now, because I get an hour break, I will be on the John O'Loughlin show. Here he is right now. Let me pipe him in. With no further ado, Mr. Leo Zagami. Welcome, sir.
Welcome, welcome, of course,
Thank you.
to this StreamYard where I'm usually the host. Now I become the guest, so
I see.
Shift
Okay. Well, we're going to have an incredible conversation. I was going to do a promotion from my later show today, but everybody here in the chat room and watching later, they know the great Leo Zagami, but I'm going to engage him today in a conversation to perhaps.
First of all, thank you for having me on. It's always an honor to be in front of somebody who has also your academic knowledge. So let's see what happens in today's show.
Oh my gosh, I'm just going to throw out a lot of new questions, new insights. I'd like to get to understand a little bit about Leo Zagami, including your father. Your father was an academic, or was he a medical doctor?
Yeah, he was an academic.
An academic. Okay, but first of all, I want to find out, and I know some of this from your earlier books. And by the way, I have the latest offering. I encourage everybody to pick this up after the show. Get it from the retailer that ate the world, otherwise known as Amazon. This is volume 7, and I have started with number 1, the publisher in San Francisco. I'd like to find out how you came across that person, but you've been living La Vida Americano since 2019, right?
Yes, I had to flee, unfortunately, Italy after persecution for what I had written in my books and articles. In Italy, when you write something, you are not only liable to a civil suit, but also to a criminal suit. So that means that you can end up in jail for what you write. It's very sad that, unfortunately, after Mussolini was defeated, they still kept his laws, and that's how we got to this point. The people who actually were the enemies of Benito Mussolini during the Second World War, they were kind of like, and I published actually a document that proves that, they were like preparing themselves. When the war ends, we're going to keep his laws and use them against the fascists, the conservatives, anyone that opposes us. And that's why Italy, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, transformed gradually in a country with more and more communist influences. So in the end, it became like that nightmare that for years we tried to avoid. So I don't really know if it was a positive thing to not have any more Operation Gladio in place when you have all these communists taking control of your life. Socialists and communists have ruined Europe as we know it, and it's now a technocratic socialist stronghold. So it's very difficult to live there. And when they now parade themselves as these defenders of democracy and Russia is the big enemy, well, it's really ridiculous because, you know, I'm the living evidence that that's really far from the truth. I was persecuted and tortured in Europe, not in Russia, where I went many times and even worked for the Ministry of Culture.
Well, I'm sad to hear that of your travails, and but I think it's providential that you came to America 2019. It's our gain. We're treated to all these incredible firsthand insights through your research and your speaking. How are you finding being treated in America so far? Did you get a good reception, a warm American reception as you expected, or not?
Yeah, well, initially, you know, when we still had the possibility before the pandemic came around to meet in person, I definitely had a chance to have a warm welcome here in Southern California, especially after I went, of course, around the US, then finally placed myself here in Southern California. And of course, is a place full of libtards, but I try to make the most of it. I am staying here because Palm Springs is Frank Sinatra's favorite town.
Yes.
Sinatra was somebody who was at one time a libtard and a Democrat, and then gave up on that to become a staunch conservative. And at the same time, I must say the truth, I have also some relatives in Northern California who left Sicily 100 years ago, hard workers. So I like to also be kind of close, even if not too close, to some relatives. And then at the end of the day, I like the weather. I think that when you reach 50 and over, then you appreciate the warm weather of Southern California.
Yes, and for those of you who are not familiar with Palm Springs, yes, it is the home of the Hollywood Rat Pack, as they were called, South, and it's in the desert. But I also, in preparing for this conversation with you, Mr. Zagami, thought that the symbology of Palm Springs, springs giving life and rejuvenation that you're bringing to American culture, as generations of Sicilians and Italian immigrants to America has enriched the Americas, the United States in specific, and also the symbology of the palm, not just this palm, the open palm, but the palm of the Bible. Right?
Yes, of course.
So Palm Springs, beautiful metaphysics. It couldn't be better. So I understand all is going well.
And I was lucky enough to be joined a year ago. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He just recently passed away, by Jordan Maxwell, who was also one of the first researchers to touch on certain subjects, who was mentor to all of us. And so it was my pleasure to really be able to be with him in the last year of his life. And this opportunity was given by God, of course, like all the opportunities we have in life. When I came here, you see, I decided to arrive at Denver Airport, which, of course, there is a lot of things to be said about this airport full of symbolism. It wasn't my first time in Colorado. I had been there before in 2008, when I then eventually will encounter later after my trip my current wife, and it was like for me a very interesting way of arriving in the middle of a snowstorm with this apocalyptic pale horse outside of the airport, aside from all the symbolism inside the airport, which was quite astounding. And then I went, of course, where my wife used to live, which was near the infamous or famous, depending, the hotel that Stanley Kubrick, that of course Stephen King based his Shining upon. So that was interesting, and where my little dog was found, because my little dog that I always carry around, he was the victim of an accident, and his whole family died, and his cage flew out of the RV, and he survived. So I mean, I wanted to visit this astonishing place, the Stanley Hotel, and visit Colorado. But then from there, I went through Utah, I went to Idaho. I traveled then to visit some other relatives. Then I went down, I think Oregon, Nevada. I kind of like visit several states. But in the end, after an incredible journey, which brought me in the middle of the night in front of Area 51, and then I ended up in the home of the Grand Master of the Order of the Golden Dawn. After that, I then passed through Death Valley, and it was really symbolic, my passage through Death Valley. And it wasn't like I mean, Death Valley, it's like an astonishing kind of place. Now I went through it 3 or 4 times, so I'm kind of not so scared anymore. But I mean, it's like really going through that desert that you imagine Jesus will have gone through his 40 days in the desert. And it's like incredible to then arrive from there into California, and then here Palm Springs, of course, like you described, perfect symbology. But also this passing through Death Valley for me was very symbolic, because we go through a birth and rebirth, and death is part, of our. We die, and for me, at least, I believe in reincarnation. I'm not your average Christian, because Christianity believed in reincarnation until 5 centuries after Christ. Then they suddenly took it off the map. But I'm a firm believer in reincarnation, and so I was very much touched by this direction that God put on me and drove me here, where I didn't really know anybody, tell you the truth. But I arrived while they were doing this UFO conference, a very famous UFO conference, and I forget the name. They held it here nearby in Cathedral City every year, and so I was able to meet immediately everybody from the scene, from both the UFO scene and the people also who I worked for years, like my publisher Brad Olson and others.
They knew you immediately, though, right? From your appearances on InfoWars, the people at the conference, the UFO conference, they were acquainted with your work, right?
Well, yes, of course. There was also Jimmy Black, who had me on. Also, I think went with him also on Coast to Coast. And, and he has also that show Fade to Black. So I was actually there, and I was guested on his show there. And then later on, actually a couple of weeks later, I had a conference in Northern California, and then I went to Texas from here. I drove all the way to Texas to go and visit instead my friend Alex Jones and spend a few days there in Texas, which was also a very interesting experience. And it wasn't my first time in Texas. I had also gone to Austin, Texas in 2008. But at that time, we didn't really we were trying to arrange a meeting with Alex, but it never happened. And it was actually, he later on came to Rome in 2015, and that's when we started to collaborate together.
That was an incredible interview. I remember that vividly. Let me take just a moment to acknowledge respectfully your wife, Mrs. Christy Zagami. She also has a book. It's called Confessions of an Illuminati Princess.
Yes, yes. Actually, she has changed the covers, because she likes to change the covers around. I mean, I love the cover of the first edition. She now has a new cover for the new edition. She has also Volume 2. Volume 2 actually is really what describes our arrival here in the United States and what pushed us to leave Italy. So the last few months of our life in Italy, which were pretty difficult and on the edge. I mean, I'm really thank God.
Well described here, yes.
Yes, and I thank very much God every day that we are able to be here instead than being in Italy, because I was risking, apart from my passport being taken from me and probably being arrested, but I was also risking much more once the pandemic started, because I had foreseen this pandemic. I had talked about the exact date it will happen in Volume 2 of my Confessions, if you read it. I said in 2020. Somebody says Contact in the Desert. Yeah, Contact in the Desert is the event that was taking place here when I arrived here in Palm Springs. So I really felt welcome, but then, of course, the pandemic started, and then we all got isolated from each other and became all asocial or social only virtually. And so I haven't really been able to go much around the United States, aside from the fact that these days, if I had to do the same kind of trips going around the Route 66 with $7, $6 a gallon, it will not be possible because it costs us a fortune.
Exactly. Now, I wanted to ask you, your books are heavily translated. Several volumes have been translated into Japanese language.
Yes, actually, Japan was
Japanese market open up for you. How did they find out about Leo Zagami?
Actually, in Japan, I published 6 books. I published
6.
6 books, and I was the first place in the world to publish my books, even before Italy. Italy was the second place in the world in 2012. My book started to be published in Japan in 2009. After I visited Japan, thanks to my wife, who used to be a model and an actress in Japan back in the days. And so she had, like you saw, of course, on the book. And I actually had been in contact with Benjamin Fulford through a common friend, and he had invited me to Tokyo. So I just wandered with my wife to Japan, not really expecting to sign a book deal. I didn't really go for that. I mean, I just went because I was curious about Japanese culture. I grown up on Akira Kurosawa's movies, and Toshiro Mifune was one of my favorite actors of all time. You know, so I've been really brought up with that kind of. I mean, it's maybe Americans don't have really all that interaction with Japanese culture, but in Italy we also had a lot of mangas in the 70s, a lot of Japanese cartoons. So there was a very big interaction with Japanese cartoons that made it possible for me as a little kid to understand a little bit more about Japanese culture. But then also, when I arrived there, Japanese people seemed really welcoming to me, and they were interested in knowing what I was trying to achieve and do. And I was interested also in what Fulford had proposed, because he said, I'm allying with the Chinese Illuminati to combat the Western Illuminati. I thought that there was something going on there. I wasn't really sure what it was. Then eventually, like I explained in volume 2, I was disappointed to explain that Fulford was simply a tool, a disinformation tool in the hands of the Chinese. And that there's a lot of connections between the Chinese triads and the Chinese Hongmen, which is the Chinese form of Freemasonry, which Fulford belongs to, and Japan, and certain elements in the Japanese mafia, which of course the Yakuza. Now, I went on publishing books until volume 6, and everything was fine and dandy until I touched on the Japanese lodges. When I started to touch on the Japanese lodges and orders, then my publisher in Japan was like, no, not too much. So it was like, it was disappointing for me, because I thought they really, were the first country to really publish my books, to want to give me this possibility. I thought they were ready also to have some self-discovery of what was going on in their own territory. Instead, there seems to be like the Japanese like to analyze exterior in other countries what's going on, but if you start touching on what goes on there in their own back, there in their courtyard, in their own homes, they kind of like get defensive. So that's why I eventually stopped collaborating, and it was sad, because I actually had created a team with an actor who is rather famous. He is Ali Yamanuchi. Ali Yamanuchi, he is known actor because he's the Japanese in Wolverine the Immortal, the guy who does the Immortal in the film. If you remember the film, you ever saw the film, Wolverine?
Yes.
There is a Japanese soldier who, because of the radioactivity, becomes immortal. And that is basically Ali Yamanuchi. And he's a man of great culture. He's a great actor. In fact, he has acted in many films, both in Italy, but also in Hollywood. And he lives in Rome, so he was very handy. Of course, he has a good preparation. He knows Italian perfect, Japanese perfect. So we kind of, I went from the first 2 books, not 2 or 3, let's say 2, 3 books, that I didn't really know what I was writing anymore, because once they were translated in Japanese, I couldn't really verify, if it was like correct. From the moment I worked with Yamanuchi, I think it was actually from the 3rd one, I kind of like changed the path, because at that point I could check every single word and define better my input on Japanese society. And these books, of course, I was trying to get these books out in the English language, but nobody was interested. So the first thing I did instead was to translate them in Italian. Some of them were originally written in Italian, in English. I would write a little bit in this and that, because then they would be translated in Japanese anyway. And when I found eventually Al, I wrote them directly in Italian. So what I did is that I tried in 2012, after 3 years of coming out with my books in Japan, because at that point I had sold many books in Japan. My first 2 books sold something like almost 50,000 copies.
Wow.
It was quite incredible, the amount of copies I sold in Japan with my books. I probably sold over 100,000 books, and I don't know the exact number, but a lot of books. And so, I mean, I'm happy because, of course, it helped me establish myself. It helped me also give me confidence as a writer, because you see, I come from a family of writers in which nobody ever believed I could become a writer. So because you see, my grandfather on my English side wrote Memories of a Castrato, which is a very particular book, but Henry Lyon Young, very intellectual book. Then you had my grandmother, who wrote bestsellers. Felicity Mason, aka Anne Cumming, wrote Love Habit, was a bestseller in various countries, translated in various languages and stuff. Then there is my grandfather on my father's side, who was an historian and published books on the history of Sicily, the Aeolian Islands, and whatnot. Then, and so I had all these people who are writers.
Your own father.
And my own father,
Zagami.
Dr. Elliot Zagami, who, like you said, he never really wanted to teach in any universities, but he ended up founding an organization called GAPA, which was an organization of psychiatrists, which is directed and he taught to this new method, of course, connected to Jung's psychoanalysis. And so I was very much into wanting to impress my father, who was still alive at that time. When I made the books in Japan, the first 2 books, I remember, the second book came out just before he died. He was very impressed. He was very impressed.
I'm glad. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, no, he was very impressed. Because I was coming from a very difficult situation. I had been arrested for espionage. Everything had been taken from me. All my assets had been frozen. I was literally with no money, and I was living out of handouts from my parents. So that was really how. When they arrested me for espionage in Norway in 2008, and I had to flee the country there. It was a very difficult situation. Eventually, in February 2010, they gave up on these accusations, which were ridiculous because I wasn't there spying. And who should I spy for? I was from Italy, in a NATO country. Norway is a NATO country. What will you spy? Either you accuse me of being a Russian spy, or either you don't accuse me of being nothing. Then there was some things that were really disturbing, because you see, these people at the same time, while I was accused of espionage and I was actually being judged for espionage, they, because I went and asked for help to the ministry or the foreign ministry for seeing my son again, they locked me up as an insane individual in a mental asylum. So, this is really stuff that makes me feel the injustice of the system. One day I hope that this injustice will be paid by somebody, because somebody should be brought at the Hague for what they did. But I carried on my life. And
I believe you're getting justice through your books. There is a higher judge. It doesn't have to come through the courts. It comes through the word. But let me just say something, Mr. Zagami. I feel like I'm speaking to someone in the nature of, let's say, a Percy Bysshe Shelley, the putative author of Frankenstein, right? He was always on the run from the law. He eventually had to go to Geneva, as you well know, with Byron. And
he always used to go to my favorite place for a tea in Rome, he was in Rome, and he went to this very good place where you can have still nowadays a great tea in Rome. But just to finish, what happened in Rome was that I had moved back to Italy because of this accusation in between 2008 and 2009. Nobody wanted to publish my books. In the end, in 2012, they saw that my books were having a certain degree of success in Japan. One publishing house in Italy gave me a break to publish my first book, but I think they were not really convinced that much. But okay, they published it. After a week, they were calling, the book is we need your permission to go for the second print, the third, the fourth, the fifth. It was like 5,000 copies sold in 1 month. Excellent. So it was a success, and Italy is a country where people don't read. So getting into the charts with the books meant a lot of exposure. But then there was a problem here. Before the books came out, I had been approached by the Vatican. The Vatican was offering me money to not publish my books that I had published in Japan, in Italy. They didn't want them published. They said, we don't care. You publish it in Japan. Who cares? Nobody reads Japanese. It's fine. We're going to give you money. I said, no, I don't accept that. And that was really when I think the Vatican started to understand that I was a threat. So after I started to publish the books in Italy, and in 2013, instead of being just a researcher who goes around doing book presentation and cashing in on the success of your book, I wanted to put in practice those books. Those books were a revolution being announced against a system that had to be overthrown. So I went into politics. And that was when I got in big trouble, because when they saw that the people were actually listening to me, and with the Pitchfork social unrest, you can still find it on Wikipedia, Pitchfork's social unrest 2013-2014, I stopped the whole country, blockades, attacks on the, it was literally social unrest, revolution. I wanted to scrap, I wanted the things that I still want from Italy. Out of NATO, out of Europe, out of the whole system. I wanted Italy out of this superpower kind of games in a new kind of world. And it didn't, unfortunately. They were threatened by me. So that was when my wife really saw the dark side of Italy. And it was described in that book that, of course, you showed.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the real life of a writer, a contemporary journalist, observer, witness. It's not a V.C. Andrews best-selling novelist type fairy tale romance. This historically is how, since the invention of the movable print, this is how the writer, the artist, and intellectual lives. So we have an incredible treasure here living here in Palm Springs. Now, let me ask you something about, because you mentioned only in passing Perugia, and immediately that brought to my mind the American case of Amanda Knox from Seattle, Washington. Describe to us, to the audience here, what Perugia is like.
Okay, Perugia, I mentioned Perugia because that was actually where suddenly the Italian judiciary decided to bring me there in front of a court. And there was actually no reason why I should be in Perugia, because even my lawyer said this book, because, by Italian standards, and I said, it's not civil, but it's criminal law. So for what you write, you find yourself in front of a judge and a court that can arrest you. It was published, you have to go by where the book is published. And the book was published in the north of Italy. So we didn't really understand why Perugia. If not, that Perugia is the home to one of the biggest Masonic communities in the country, and also satanic communities in the country, connected to that infamous episodes of the Monster of Florence, the assassinations that went on until the middle of the 80s that people might not know about, but influence some very important Hollywood movies even. And it's like I was brought in front of the court, and then suddenly my lawyer, of course, showed the book and said, but this book is printed near Monza. So then, they had to dismiss the whole case. But they made a big thing about it. And Amanda Knox, of course, was in a town which is usually a student town also, because Perugia is notorious, university. And that is one of the few universities I ended up teaching once for an occasional teaching session. I was invited there. I have some great friends in Perugia, I must say. And this has been always since my early 20s, because as you know, in my past life I was also a DJ and a record producer, and Amanda Knox used to go to this club called Red Zone, and I used to work there. So I have a lot of people who actually met her. And the story around what happened with the assassination of this British girl, of this English girl, Meredith, is very sad. Yeah, very sad, very sad. This Meredith is very sad, because I don't think that they have to say the full story. Definitely, there was a guy there who was arrested in the end, but we might not really ever know the full story and all the what happened. But it's definitely a very dark scenario also, because all of this happens, in a kind of a Halloween setup in which there is a dark scenario. And this city and this town is renewed in the last few decades, unfortunately, also for a lot of drugs being used by the young people. And it's sad, but this happens, you see. When people get out of control, especially when they use drugs, they are more susceptible to demonic influence.
And do you think this demonic, satanic influence was part of the Amanda Knox story that never came out? Because they concentrated on DNA evidence, forensics. While I think there was some heavy metaphysical criminality that underlies, just like they brought you down there to set you up for prosecution.
Okay, I can tell you one thing. First of all, in the years prior to me being called by a court, I was actually called as an expert for satanic cases happening in Perugia by the local police forces. So I was actually called as an expert there.
You?
Yes. I have actually some very dear friends there.
Please write about it.
Eh?
Please write about it.
Well, I mean, now that I'm out of Italy, I can write about. When I was in Italy, they didn't want to. I was always very secretive. The fact that I used to do a lot of conferences all the time in Perugia. The actual guy who made the cover for my latest book is from Perugia, and he is actually involved. As we speak, Vincenzo Viceversa, he has just done an important conference patronaged by the university and all the local institutions on the dangers of trap and hip-hop, of music for the young people and social networks also. So he's very much, and he's also, he's an academic, he's somebody who is an expert in symbolism, and a very dear friend of mine, because he also used to be a DJ at the Red Zone Club back in the day. So we have also
along with me.
So we go back a long time. And
comment: this cover art is incredible.
It's full of symbolism that is very much studied. You have to understand. I don't know if you ever heard of the Temple of Psychic Youth. It was an organization put up by a guy called Genesis P. Orridge.
Oh, he's British, right?
Yes, and. It was a very occult organization, and Vincenzo used to be a part of it. So he had also his own experience within the Illuminati, because the Temple of Psychic Youth was part of that. And here, so you have all the symbols. You have the Ahriman, you have the symbol that, of course, is used also by the World Health Organization, but we know this is an important symbol also for the medical establishment. Then all this in a triangle of the Illuminati with an eye that also depicts the word and the symbol really of the Illuminati for the creation of the cyber Satan. So it's like aiding and abiding the birth of the cyber Satan. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, Ahriman, in the Rudolf Steiner tradition. And then you have under here also the symbol that was paraded for a while, for a brief time in front of the United Nations, which is also connected to Ahriman. So, and then when you go to the back of the book, you have this photo made in the home of the monastic tradition in one of the most amazing places, which is the Sacro Speco. And this is the symbol of the COVID. So, it's a lot of symbolism. And behind here, you can't really see it. There is actually a dragon. You can't really see it here, but it is a dragon which represents China, which is aiding and abiding the birth of cyber Satan for 2030. So
And
This
it's all on top of an integrated circuit for the Cyber Satan electronic
absolutely,
circuit board.
absolutely,
You know, there
absolutely.
could be an entire supplement to this book just decoding the cover art.
Decoding the cover.
Congratulations, and congratulations to your colleague, the DJ artist academic.
Vincenzo Viceversa, who is nowadays also an expert. I mean, he's a media expert and a guy who definitely understands what he's doing. Because you see, I mean, the interaction that we have. He also did the cover, for example, for Volume 6, for Volume 5, for the little details that he puts in that at times they are not immediately visible, but then you can go and they are very much because of his experience. He's an experienced symbolist, and I think that it's great to create a team with somebody you know for over 30 years.
Wow.
That has lived with you a different experience like the one we lived in the music business. Because electronic music was not any ordinary music. Electronic music, when it came together especially when we started to play it in clubs in the 80s and 90s, it was an experimental thing. There was nothing set. It was a complete experiment, also brought together by new instruments. That the digital instruments, after there was the analog ones that already were experimented by people like Pink Floyd to the extent with their Moogs and stuff. But then you had the second phase with the digital, you know. And in all this, of course, the Japanese, we have to thank them because great
Roland, Yamaha,
great
Akai.
stuff. But then we have to thank also somebody we shouldn't thank, which is Mr. Kurzweil, who then appears in Volume 7.
Yes,
because he had
for
a
a while.
past life himself as a creator of some of the most amazing keyboards, but then he went on to become Dr. Evil in Google, and so that's it. Yeah.
And that volume there, I recognize is volume 66.6.
Yes,
is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, but like we said, the symbology is always present. You know, I mean, like for example, in Volume 5, in new edition, then you have the mask here on the Statue of Liberty, and then you have all kinds of little things here, the dragon, and then you have here this Jesuit confessional thing, and so I mean, there is all kinds of things that are, of course, part of my work and represent my work, which I'm very glad also to have introduced to the American people, thanks to the son of Oliver Stone, because in 2014, early 2014, when I experienced the police breaking through my door, being locked up, all kinds of terrible things, I didn't give up. I said, okay, Italy is becoming too dangerous for me. I have to find, and my books at that point were very successful. They suddenly stopped selling them because they said that politically I was ruining the image of these publishers or whatever. So they didn't want to have anything with to do with me. So suddenly all the money also was, you know, this is like my livelihood, was interrupted by these people. And it was terrible what happened. So when I managed to leave Italy, because I actually had to ask a psychiatrist who was in the Knights Templars, who I knew, to take on the responsibility to sign, because at one point they had locked me in a system that they wanted to poison me, basically, give me lithium, all kinds of These people wanted me out of the way. And the guy said to me, Leo, I'm going to sign this paper, but you have to promise me you will never do politics again in Italy or go into the public arena politically, because they want you dead. And I said, well, I can't promise you that. Yeah, okay. I just want to go to America at this point. So I came here. I wanted to find a book deal for my books that were out in Italian. And one guy who really believed in me was Sean Stone, who is the son of Oliver Stone, who worked for a period also with RT, and a very nice guy. And I stayed for 3 months in Long Beach, and I was going backwards and forwards to Hollywood, visiting him, getting introduced to all kinds of people, trying to find a way to translate this book, because translating a book, it's a big thing, especially these kind of books, 400-500 pages. You need a lot of work, you know, and you need to have people who So then in the end, he found this publisher, which is Brad Olsen, based in San Francisco. And he offered to publish the books, to help him with the translation. But of course, it was a help with the translation using a little bit of electronic. But then I had to do the rest of the work. And so it took me approximately, at that point, he wanted to bring out all 5 of my books that I had published in Italian up until then. It was volume 1, 2, 3, and then Invisible Master, and then Pope Francis the Last Pope. We decided to start with the smallest one, Pope Francis the Last Pope, which became also the book that brought Alex to Rome to film that documentary we did together in Rome. But what happened then at that point was that it took from 2000. I went back to Italy in June 2014, and it took basically 3 years to translate all 5 books. 3 years of working almost 12 to 15 hours a day, constant, to make sure that these books were not like you could read these books not as translating books that are translated, but written in English. I wanted the people to have the feel that these books were not translated. And that's not an easy thing, because, of course, I'm English, half English, Italian, but I'm not American. So then my wife, of course, is American. She could help me with the English-American side of things. There is also different rules of citation from the English way of doing things. So I had to learn of these rules of citation in America, blah, blah, blah. And so it took some time. But then I brought out these books, and it was an opportunity, I guess, to get my name known here in the United States and find my books in every bookstore, Barnes and Noble, and whatever. After, of course, I published these 5 books that I signed the contract for, I instead started to write directly in English and publish them on this new publishing outlet which we created with my wife, which is called the Cursum Perficio. And so we started with an experiment, which was her book. Then we put this other book I had made, the volume 5. Initially it was called in another way, but they censored it. So then we changed the name. We took away some things that they might have been a problem. And then in the end, because I was challenged by the OTO, which was this organization that I had belonged once. And so they didn't want this particular book. And so they tried to pinpoint on maybe my use of a symbol of theirs or something to just bring the book down. But then the other thing was this, that these organizations like the OTO, they actually had tried to get my publisher to not Brad Olsen to not publish the book at the beginning. People don't know that, but my first 2 books had a lot of problems to actually bring them out. He was contacted by the deputy grandmaster of the OTO, a guy called Milo Duquette, who actually publishes books also with Brad, other kind of books. So it was kind of like, and Brad told him, and he told, well, you know this about Leo or this. And he said, well, yeah, I know it because he has written it in his book. He actually hasn't hidden anything. Oh. And at that point, they just shut up and I carried on. Volume 2, they threatened the publisher with a lawsuit when I had actually written something that was completely correct and actually was proven about this Brotherhood of Satan. A couple of their representatives said that they were not public people. When you go on their Facebook profile, they had the symbols of NBC, ABC, and this and that because they appear on TV. Said they're not public people. They are, of course, they are public people. But the same thing then was at one point, I think Arizona prohibited the inmates of the prisons to still to this day to purchase volume 2 and read it in the prison. It was like weird, to say the least, to have these kind of problems. So, but like I said, I went on, and the books were kind of successful. We managed to get get me known here in the English world, in the English-speaking world, because of course it was my dream to finally get also the English-speaking world on board, but also because I've been known first by the English-speaking world when I came out with my blog in 2006, and when I basically started this exposure work. I didn't start it in Italy. I wasn't even living in Italy. I was living in Norway at the time. And in the fall of 2006, I had decided that I had enough about these threats I was receiving in Italy and in other places. As a member of the Monte Carlo Lodge, I was having some problems. And I decided to expose them. And I decided because my son was born at that point, and I wanted to change around my life. And but then I received immediately threats, but serious threats. They came there with the intelligence services and the social services threatening, you will lose your son if you don't give up immediately on your blog. They threatened to take my child. They threatened, I mean, it was incredible. In a country like Norway, one imagines, oh, wow, a democracy. They were behaving like the Soviet Union. What democracy? So I'm like happy that I came out with that information back then, but I soon realized between 2006 to 2009, when I went to Japan, that the internet was already a censored kind of territory, and that things could be manipulated by people taking some phrases you out of context, or just throwing you inside this kind of like context in which everything is like Elvis Presley is still alive, UFOs, and all kinds of BS. I'm not like that. Even my approach to the UFO is not the approach of these people. Even when I went to Continent in the Desert, I felt detached from most of the people there, because my approach is more of like an academic approach. I want to have the evidence, and it has to be serious evidence. And plus, I have a esoteric approach to the subject. And that's what I made then visible with my Invisible Master book.
Now, this is a good point to pivot to your excursus on the Lucifer project as owned by the Vatican, the observatory, because I did see this part of your book as being highly rigorous, yet infused with a metaphysical, deep understanding of what the Lucifer telescope or observatory, what it represents. Please, could you expand on that, Mr. Zagami?
Sure. I mean, I started to really write about it back in 2007. At the time, I was collaborating with a website called Illuminati News by a Swedish guy called Wens Penre, who was living here, I think, in the United States. And I wrote an article about it because I saw that the Jesuits were doing things on Mount Graham. And later on, with my friend at the time, a journalist called Greg Zismansky, we discovered that there was a lot of problems with the Indians there that were actually trying to oppose the construction first and the activities that this observatory was undergoing. So that was my first encounter with this place. Then later on, in 2015, a guy who works with Stephen Quayle, he's called Timothy Alberino, and Stephen Quayle produces he's a Christian who produces documentary on the subject of UFO, but with a different kind of take. No, he came to do a document. Alex is a friend of Alex, who then sent me this guy to Rome to do a documentary. And we were able at the time to finally get in front of the camera a friend of Zecharia Sitchin, who had been the intermediary between Zecharia Sitchin and the Vatican, and had brought backwards and forwards documents and stuff, even UFO manufacts, from the Vatican to Zecharia Sitchin and vice versa. And it was, of course, also friend with now late also Corrado Balducci, who was a ufologist for the Vatican after being a famous exorcist. So at that point, what happened was that this documentary was basically done in Rome, and we managed to film it at one point, even within the headquarters of the Jesuits. We managed. Don't ask me how we managed, because I say the whole story once. Actually, people can go on Timothy Alberino's channel. We did a video about it a couple of months ago, just remembering what happened. Because when he went back to America, they tried to kill him. They tried to literally kill him and his family.
Oh, no.
It was a really bad experience that he went through, because probably they didn't want this video to circulate. But then, because this video was done in a way that I was talking about these things, and then they had managed to go to Mount Graham at the observatory with the Lucifer telescope inside the place with a hidden camera, with the Jesuits admitting that at certain times of the day they couldn't do the things because UFOs were passing by all the time. And this was done on camera, though, in a hidden camera in a purse. Mm-hmm. So it's like it was a very unusual experience that I had this, let's say, second contact with what is known as the Large Binocular Telescope Near Infrared Ultra Wide, because that is the initials. Now, Lucifer, then it's supposed to be the initials, Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. But this observatory that is based in Safford, I think it's called Safford, in Arizona, Safford, it's basically a place that also is entrenched of energies and is a portal to extra-dimensional forces. So it's not just a place where you just can observe the stars. Now, I now went there. I passed at one point. I was driving by there early in the morning while I was on my way to Texas, and it was a very incredible experience. But I was never able to visit the observatory like my colleagues that made the documentary. But I think that the interesting thing about it is that, first of all, the Jesuits are the scientists of the Vatican. They are not only they are the scientists, and at the same time they are the occultists of the Vatican. Let's not forget the libellus magicus that was brought out, transcribed and edited, and brought out by. It's like a magical kind of grimoire that appeared at one point. I think at the end of the 1880s, because of Arthur Edward White, the famous Freemason, in 1875. It was translated by Herbert Irwin. And that you have all the spirits, the evil spirits, the conjuration of the spirit Uziel, and all kinds of things. And this happened, though, allegedly in connection with the Jesuits. Now, we're not ever sure if these things are genuine or not, but I can say from my personal experience that the Jesuits are definitely experts in the occult. That's why they are the number one exorcist. They have a connection with the ancient knowledge that goes back to Atlantis. That's why Athanasius Kircher was obsessed with Atlantis, and Athanasius Kircher is renewed as one of the world's greatest Jesuits. And it's actually in, I think, volume 6 that they start talking about both the connection, who are the most important Jesuits, Athanasius Kircher, and now Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who is the guy who invents also the concept of the noosphere, and it's like the alpha and omega. And the omega is basically when the artificial intelligence arrives to a level which is superior, all including, and it's what inspired Arthur C. Clarke and the 2001 Space Odyssey. So all these things are very important, and I talk about it also in volume 7 of my Confessions, because it's we talk about, of course, the Lucifer's infrared technology and the fact that they are searching for something. So one day I was with this guy who is the one who offered me money for not publishing the books, the Vatican, when he sent me this guy, this member of the Vatican Secret Services who was working with a guy now deceased who Pope John Paul II used to call his general, Marinelli. And they offered me money, but they also gave me some information because, for a period of time, I collaborated with them. And actually, I brought Princess Kaoru Nakamaro from Japan to the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
They were very much interested in Princess Kaoru Nakamaro. And so that was, let's say, a positive experience. But at one point, I asked him, what is it with Mount Graham? What are they really doing in Mount Graham? And so he told me that the real purpose is what we see not volume, but in part 3 of Omen in the 80s. You remember there was Omen 1, Omen 2, and Omen 3. Now, Omen 3 was, I think the subtitle was like the final conflict or something like that. It was like this, I mean, maybe it's not the best movie of all time, of course. It was a little bit B. I don't think it was B. I think it was just like, the sequels sometimes tend to go on a little bit too much, and sometimes they lose the freshness of the Omen 1. Of course, the first Omen with, I think it was Gregory Peck, I think it was the
Damien.
Yeah.
Devil Child.
Yeah. It was a great movie. But having said that, it has some very interesting elements, the Omen 3. And it opens up with these people in an observatory that call in the monastery in Subiaco, which is the place where I used to live before coming to the United States, which is known as the birthplace of the monastic tradition. And they say, we are seeing the trajectory here, the conjunction whereby there is the birth of the Antichrist as well as the birth of the Messiah. This is like the astronomical, the observatory served the purpose of finding this. And so what is reflected above is reflected below, if we have to go by the emerald tablets, no? So this is really my experience when I asked him. He confirmed that. He just simply said it's to observe when certain things will materialize and when we will have the Messiah and the Antichrist present. I was like a little bit shocked when he said that. I remember I was in front of his car in San Giovanni, which in a road which leads the church, the first church in the world, which is the Mother and Cabot of San Giovanni Laterano, to the Church of Santa Croce in Jerusalem, which used to be the villa of the mother of Constantine. So the first church, also because she was the adept of this sect that then took over the empire. And so I remember that really touched me, because I thought, wow, so then there is something really there happening in Mount Graham. And then when I saw what they managed to film with this hidden camera in the observatory relating the UFOs, and then when I connected to all the past experiences, when I started to write articles about Mount Graham in 2007, then everything kind of connected. And so in my new book, in volume 7, I wanted to give a connection also with this unveiling of the UFO phenomenon by the Vatican, so that people can really understand the purpose of the Vatican in starting this gradual because the Vatican is not your average ufologist. It's not like they are in contact they're not on the History Channel talking about ancient aliens. They should be talking about faith and things, no? So I was, I think I pinpointed down very well. The thing is that these UFOs, aliens, interdimensional, whatever technology they have given to us, it was definitely a trap in a way. It's like I went to Roswell. That is another thing I did when I came to America. On my way to Texas, in the state trip, we decided to go to Roswell. And this is something that my wife also touches in volume 2 of her Confessions of an Illuminati Princess, because something strange happened there. And I filmed it, and it was really really weird. Okay, first of all, I arrived unannounced, without knowing anybody. I just go to passing, I say, okay, let's pass. My wife says, okay, I booked a motel there, the UFO crash in something, something like that in Roswell, and we are staying there for the night. I said, but isn't it a little bit out of the way? Then we have to go from there to Texas. I have to be in studio tomorrow morning. I said, no, but we should manage. Okay, so I arrived there in the afternoon, and I go to the UFO museum. And the interesting thing is that I go through the door of the UFO museum. It was like 5 minutes before it closed down. So I was like, nah, maybe I just want to see it from outside. The guy who was there sitting at the desk calls me and says, "You are Leo Zagami?" It was like Donald Schmidt, who basically is one of the curators of the museum and a famous author, also various books. He's one of the most known researchers in the world on Roswell. And he was like, wow, it's an honor to have you here. Let me give you a special guided tour. And so we went through this thing. And he explained me a few things, which are very interesting about also what the Jesuits had done there and blah, blah, blah. Then at one point, because, relating to my work that I do for as a Vaticanist, people always tend to bring out that side of things. So we were back at something. I crashed, I go to sleep. I had at one point in the middle of the night, I was supposed to wake up because we had to leave by 2:00 to arrive at noon in Texas. It's at least 10 hours, if not more, I think, trip. And first of all, I have a strange nightmare. I didn't know this. We didn't even, it was to the day exact, the day of the crashing of Roswell 72 years later. And 72 is a symbolic because, it's also a very important number, as you know. So I suddenly got up and I was like, no. My wife had to wake me up because basically I was thinking that these people, it was like, my wife said that I was like, screaming like hell because and I was like thinking that I was on a spaceship. They were abducting me, these entities. So my wife literally dragged me back into my body, let's say, and at that point we left. And when we left, it was 2:00 in the morning. Suddenly, a presidential, literally, there was these cars followed by 5 to 10 kilometers, that something like at least 6 miles of cars, military thing, coming in the middle of Roswell, in the middle of the night, out of nowhere. And we had to stand. At one point, I started to film until the police came. At the one police thing came and said like this, and we had to immediately. But I filmed it and I showed the guys, in fact, at InfoWars, and when I arrived the day after, and then I called the guy Donald, the curator of the museum, because he has contact with all the military in the area. So I said, listen, can you check out what was going on last night in Roswell? Because this is what I witnessed. And I showed him the video, and it was like, well, okay. And he called, and there was nothing going on. But let me tell you, Roswell is one road you go in, the other one you go out. And so when I was going out, I could see at a distance, this group of cars had arrived somewhere in the middle of the fields, I don't know where. And so it was completely weird. It was kind of like, a strange kind of event that occurred, even for somebody. And like I said, the number, you see, when you have the number 72, because after I realized, I said, but because Donald told me, he said, today is the day of the crash, Roswell. This is the anniversary, we celebrate every year. I was like, what? I didn't know. I just came here because it was on the way, But, like we go back in that kind of synchronism that really is synchronicity is very powerful when you are connected with God. And the number 72, you see, the number 24, the thrones multiplied by 3 rays of the crown, they then equal 72, which is the name of God. And so 72 years after the Roswell accident, to have this event was definitely something unusual. And so I actually talk about it in volume 4, this one, and actually I think I even talk about it in volume 7. I think I briefly mentioned it. It was an unusual thing. The trip I did later on in the morning was also very unusual because, of course, for me, arriving from Italy, seeing all the oil fields of Texas from New Mexico arriving. The only other time I went to Texas, I had arrived from Colorado, so I had done a completely different road. But it was definitely, I think, a moment that something happened there. And we were there at the right time to witness it.
Well, Mr. Leo Zagami, you have lived a providential life, that's for sure. One of adventure, intrigue, and deep insight. What can we expect from Volume 8? Can you give us a preview? Because I know you're a writing machine.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm kind of like working on 2 projects, so I don't really know which one I'm gonna go in for Volume 8. On one side, my project was to translate and adapt and, of course, upgrade, because it's a book I published already 7 years ago in Italy, Illuminati and the Music of Hollywood, regarding Hollywood and what is everything behind the occult side of Hollywood and how it influences. And, of course, we still see it, up until the other day, how these people with their farces or their whatever games influence the majority of the population. But that was one of the ideas I had, to do that as Volume 8. Another idea, though, would be to instead go further into my experiences with Russia, because you see, I was somebody who worked for many years in Russia, and so my experience with the Russian cultural system and everything that I lived in Russia has brought me to the conclusion that what is happening now was something that they had warned me about 20 years ago, and that it's now unfolding just as they predicted. And it seems like it's not like Putin is the madman here, like we say in the West. No, he's actually the calculator who really plays a chess game with the West. And the West doesn't really get anything. In fact, there was no surprise when today I saw that a new poll has suggested that Putin's success, mission, even if it's not successful, is bringing his popularity up by 10, 15 points. 85% of the people in Russia support him. The West can't understand that because they don't understand Russian culture. And there is a lot to understand about that. So I'm kind of like in between choices and seeing, maybe I can include everything in one book, who knows? But I'm in between choices. But definitely within a month, I'm going to finally understand which way to go. And then probably by the fall, I will have a new book if God wants.
In fall. Great. I'm looking forward to it. I know it's going to be another blockbuster.
See,
Mr. Leo Zagami, thank you so much. Please have the last word.
Yeah, as an academic, I wanted to ask you one question, because I'm on your show. I don't have many possibilities to chat with academics these days. And I wanted to ask you, because I made this book in a way that the academic world couldn't debunk, because, as you see, it's very much down to the detail, and the sources are academically cited in a very detailed way. I wanted your opinion.
Well, one of them is just a mechanical issue, and that's indexing. So far as citations are, there's tons of them, and that's very important for the credibility.
Yes.
And so I think it holds up with great rigor. Now, the good news is that there is a resurgence at least in the Anglo-American and some even in Sweden academia. There's a renewed interest in Western esoterica. Western esoteric tradition. So, Mr. Zagami, the good news is that your work here is pioneering a move toward a return to a serious understanding of our metaphysical and our physical reality, our history. So I applaud you for that. And you know what it's going to do in a matter of course, as if it's just a mosquito? It's going to drive out CRT, critical race study. It's going to push out of the way LGBTQ because they're just filling a vacuum that the young people want. You see, all the CRT, it's trendy. They have no alternative. This, ladies and gentlemen, and what this represents is the alternative. This
Thank
is
you.
what's going to renew the university system in the West and the East and globally and in Russia. So I congratulate you. I applaud
Thank you
you.
so
I
much.
recognize the beauty and the magnificence of your intellectual contribution. And I'm so grateful that we're alive to experience this challenge. We are put on earth to challenge the powers that be with all our might, our intelligence, our integrity, our intellect, our spirit, and our heart. So thank you very much, Leo Zagami.
Thank you so much for your words, really kind words. Thank you so much, Professor Hamamoto, and I hope to speak to you soon when we have the possibility. And great to have this chat with you today and to be here with you in the United States of America.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
God bless you all, and let's pray for the
Let us
future
pray
of this
together.
man.
God bless you. Yes.